And there's this other question about, why we have to do it again and how we could do it better, which I'm not going to talk about. That's sort of what Heidegger's doing in basic questions. But we do have to try to answer the topic. And the topic really has two parts, and they're both hard. One is you have to get it right about what the clearing is in the first place. Get it right. That's the wrong, not truth by, not correspondence truth. You have to have an interpretation of what Heidegger means by the clearing in the first place before, and then you have to explain why it's so puzzling that anybody could experience it. And then you have to give a story of what would it be like to experience it. So I learned a whole lot of new stuff, believe it or not, after 20 or 30 years about about the clearing. It was really exciting. And I see now why I assigned the way back into the ground of metaphysics. I knew that it was important for you to get a grasp of the clearing, that you see Heidegger doing the illumination metaphor, and that it's the light in which everything is visible, and throwing in this new thing, the ground, the dirt metaphor, that it's the tree, it's the dirt in which the tree of metaphysics grows. But I didn't see that you need both of them, that to get what the clearing is about, neither metaphor can do the whole story. It's the ground and it's the light, and now I have to explain that. Okay, to begin with, the clearing is a kind of activity. You can hear it as a verb, a kind of lighting. And that is, in Heidegger language, an activity of unconcealing. Now, it turns out that this unconcealing has two aspects, and the light gets one of them, and the dirt gets the other one. As unconcealing and this is aspect one, as unconcealing and opening up a space in which we can encounter things, or they can show up for us, and we can make correspondence through statements about them, and we can relate to other people and so forth. It has to withdraw in order to work. That's the light story. It gives us all this intelligibility, and it does that by not itself being part of the world, or that it opens up. It gets out of the way. That's the light idea. It gets out of the way. It goes into the background. It has to get out of the way to go into the background. In Heidegger language, withdraw, in order for us to be able to encounter entities, ourselves, and things. Okay, now that's the part I've been stressing more over and over. But I discovered that isn't going to get you anywhere. At least it wasn't getting me anywhere when I tried to think about what it would be to experience it. Because that gets you into this sort of head-breaking puzzle. If it withdraws, if it has to be invisible so that things can be visible, then it looks like under that aspect, you're not going to experience it. So it turns out there's another aspect of it, which was staring me in the face, and which I sort of know about, but never thought much about or talked much about. It's the unconcealing. The light part is the open that results from the unconcealing, so to speak. But there's also the fact that something must be concealed for there to be unconcealed. And this unconcealing isn't sort of ever completed. It's sort of bringing stuff out of the background, but you never bring it all out of the background. You never get it all conceptualized. And now now I have to talk the tree metaphor. The tree grows in the ground. The ground is like, well, let's say like a reservoir. This is the first way to think about it. I mean, if you can say it's like Earth, but and it is like Earth in the original work of art. But what's that like? Well, it's a reservoir of other marginal practices, and even sort of stuff like ways of acting that aren't even organized as much as marginal practices, out of which you could organize marginal practices, or that could become gathered and organized as marginal practices, and from there it could become gathered and organized as a whole understanding of being. It's a reservoir of the stuff out of which future understandings of being could be made. But of course, it's not like a storehouse of that. It's not a shelf in which there are these positive other understandings of being waiting to be grabbed off the shelf and instantiated. But it's the sort of stuff out of which other understandings of being can be made. And that's why it's the earth in which the tree of philosophy grows. It can be drawn up by the roots, Heidegger says, and that means interrogated and conceptualized, but it is never absorbed into the tree, because it's this reservoir which is never, it's the reservoir of earth and concealment, which is never completely drawn up and conceptualized, and so forth. That's why you need the earth one. But you notice both of them, neither one of them does the whole job. The one of the illumination in the room doesn't have the reservoir, the part, the murky part, the earthy part. It has the withdrawing part very well put in. The only way the illumination in the room could do the murky part is if it was very murky illumination, if the room were very dimly lit. But then it wouldn't be doing the job of the clearing, which is to be, so to speak, that bright illumination in which we encounter things and they are clear for us and become intelligible. So the light story doesn't work. In fact, it works against it. So you need another story. And so the murky story, the dirt story, does well for the reservoir and the background. But notice it doesn't withdraw. You don't say, it doesn't help any to say somehow, and the dirt has to get out of the way in order for the tree to grow. And it doesn't even write. Yeah.
There's a different but analogous point, which is that the dirt is so obvious we forget to pay attention to it.
Right? That's true.
So the tree is what we end up paying attention to.
That's true.
It's always lying there.
Right.
Pay attention to.
Right.
Yep.
Good.
But light story is a stronger thing.
The light has to get out of the way. If you pay any attention to it, it gets in the way. Yes, the dirt could be the background, but it can't be somehow the necessarily withdrawing background. Good. That's what I think is right about that. So to get the dark earth as reservoir, okay, I've said that. And the idea of the clearing is supposed to have both. But the clearing doesn't do either one of them very well. I mean, it's not a sort of, you ignore the clearing in the field, the clearing in the forest, which is what he's talking about. Well, there is the sort of uncleared forest around, but it's too definite, and it's just made up of the same sort of trees that you've got cut down to make the clearing. I mean, it's not sufficiently murky and earthy, but that's the idea. There's a lot more forest there that out of which you could make other clearings. And it's not so obvious either how the clearing has to withdraw. I don't know. The clearing, the clearing is a good name for the phenomenon that Heidegger's trying to point at. But it isn't going to, without the world, without the earth, dirt story, and the light in the room story. It's sort of like the world. Is it? I haven't thought about that. Is it true that the light is the world and that we're getting just the two components of truth getting itself to work? Maybe. Sounds likely. Yeah. Sounds likely. That was staring me in the face. Sort of. So without the light world story and the dirt earth story, the way the clearing works as an opening in which you can encounter something as something couldn't be explained. So I'm retroactively very happy I assigned the way back into the ground of metaphysics, even though it costs an outrageous amount. $250 each, just for the rights for that little piece of paper. It was important. Okay, so much. Now, so I've learned a whole lot more about it in this discussion, even up to the point where now I think you could map it on Earth and World, which is a new aha. And remember, and where a world looks like the light metaphor and Earth looks like the dark metaphor, and it's all fitting together. I'm amazed. Okay. Let's suppose we now got a new grip on the clearing in this 8+ paper I'm writing. Now, thanks to the help of the TAs, which you can all have too by seeing them in office hours, just like I do. Okay, so now the question becomes, and what in the world would it be to experience? Well, now I have to tell you a story which, how many have had philosophy 6? Anybody? Well, for once, you're in the catbird seat as opposed, I mean, as it like, because that is you know something that will be very helpful, and I can't, I'll sort of tell it in very short to everybody else. In philosophy 6, we read Aeschylus's Oresteia. The Oresteia is written at the sort of time, roughly, as far as I can tell, where Thesis is going over into poesis. It's about the understanding of being. It's the sort of realization of the understanding of being as nurturing, as bringing forth. And it's Athens, 5th century BC. A little after the temple, I think. If anybody knows the Greek story clearer than I do. Because I think the temple is supposed to be Thesis focused. And the Oresteia is clearly poesis focused. But what's important about the Oresteia is it tells a story about the special way that the light and the dark, the earth and the sky, has been gotten together by the Athenians, and in a way that nobody else was ever able to do it before. It's about the earth has got to do with the Furies, and the sky has got to do with the new gods, Apollo and so forth. But I can't go into all that. But the important thing that we want to say here is this. That the amazing thing about it is that unlike every other tragedy that the Greeks had, they performed this one over and over. I mean, usually, believe it or not, these great tragedies like Oedipus and so forth just get performed once. But Aeschylus, through the Oresteia, was so important to them that they performed it again and again. That's one thing. And they actually took part in the performance. The way it's written, the audience, the Athenians, finally march into the story, so to speak, and march out together with the Furies who have become the Eumenides. Now, what is all that? What am I trying to say, telling you all that story? Well, I'm going to say that they did this, that they wrote this play, that they all went to see it, or that they, chose this play, repeated this play, all went to see it and marched out as part of it, means that they sensed that their nature as poets, their nature as human beings, as nurturers, and somehow the city as the result of nurturing, and nature as a whole as something that you can bring forth, this whole understanding of being wasn't some independent fact about the universe that they could just sit back and make correct statements about it, but that it needed them as preservers. And that's Heidegger's word for it. When you experience the clearing, you experience that it's up to you and your practices to keep this understanding of being, in Heidegger language, stabilized, sheltered, in my language, focused, and so forth. And they were also expressing their gratitude for that way of life. Experiencing the clearing, then, in my story, would be if a culture understands themselves as preservers, partaking in keeping that understanding of being going, and are grateful that there is such an understanding of being, then they have a sense of the clearing, even though they don't interrogate it or think about it. Yes?
You might not want to answer this, but can you give an example or a sense of it, how it would be for Thesis rather than poesis?
How it would work for Thesis, not in the least, I'm afraid.
It depends sort of essentially on the nurturing aspect.
Well, that the Aeschylus story does, but I can say roughly. I mean, the poesis story would have to be that they did things in front of the temple, if it's a poesis temple, in which, and they felt that it was they that called the god, or that, well, if they weren't there, the god wouldn't whoosh up in the temple or something. Not that they could bring it forth, but that they had to be there to appreciate the god, to make it whoosh forth, and that the temple only did what it did insofar as they were around to reflect the light of it, and they would have to do something to show that. I can't do much more. I agree. Does that used to help at all? Something. They would have to show that they understood that the fact that the temple shined and they could see things in its light was required them as to do it. And of course, nurturing is much easier because it's more obvious how it requires it. Much more obvious. So what I had this in the back of my mind as a father that now lives as nailed. But that gives you an even harder paper topic and something to do. You can't use nurturing because you're supposed to do it for the pre-Socratics, and I did it for the contemporaries of Socrates, I think. I mean, one generation after the temple. But I mean, they in the Oresteia, it was more clear how they experienced the clearing. I don't know what story to tell about how, except the very pathetic one I just told, about how the Thesis people and experienced the clearing by way of the way they related to the temple. But now, let me remind you now of your job if you want to take this hard topic. You explain the clearing in your own way. And for that, you're responsible to the book, so to speak, the text. I mean, you are supposed to get it right about Heidegger's view of the clearing. Then you're on your own to make up a story about the rest, because Heidegger doesn't tell us anywhere I know what he means. I couldn't even find where he says the Greeks experienced the clearing of pre-Socratics, though I know he says it. And I certainly don't know any place where he explains it. Yeah.
Just make sure, this is if you want to do question number 6.
Yes, I'm talking about question number 6 all the time. That's the question that says this. It's the centralist question, and probably the hardest question. And but now that I sort of tried to give you some help, I hope I haven't sort of walked all over it so that there's nothing left for you to do. I doubt it. It's so hard. Anyway, I'm going to say this one more way, and then I'm going to stop. I kept trying to put it. And here's another way to put it. They couldn't just sit back and enjoy their understanding of being as if it was a metaphysical fact. They felt that their practices and participation were called for, and that in return they received a gift that things showed up as something, and that there were meaningful differences. That's the form of what it is to experience the clearing. And of course, they did not experience the clearing as a clearing. If they did that, they would be what Heidegger wants the future people to be. That's what we're supposed to be able to do if we understand Heidegger's lectures and basic questions. Now, heaven only knows what that means. I mean, I'm not even trying to tell you what that means. That's if you think you know, you can certainly write on that. That paper topic isn't in here, but since you are allowed to speculate about what it was for them to experience the clearing as a clearing, and you have nothing to go on but your own wit and plays that are lying around like the Oresteia. If you want to try to figure out what this future world would be like, in which there was a new God shining and a new clearing, and moreover, human beings experience the clearing as a clearing.
One clearing among other possible.
Yes, it would be one clearing among other possible clearings, and that's a clue of it. That's something that they have that the Greeks couldn't have. You could write about that for sure. Okay, I think now I'm ready to make a transition to the age of the world picture, but I want to stop after all that and ask questions. Boy, I hope I don't erase this. Anyway, to back up people, because this is really interesting new stuff. Okay, anybody want to say anything about this? You shouldn't really. I think that your chance to say anything is now in office hours with your TAs and in your papers. Okay, and I want to go on because it's time we got to the age of the world picture, partly because Hans Flug is coming in next time to talk about a specific aspect of the age of the world picture, that the footnote that nobody dies for values, the whole issue about values, which I'm not going to talk about. But I have to talk about enough of it so that you are ready for him when he does talk about it. And then what's left over we'll talk about next Tuesday. Okay, so here we go. The transition is that we've been doing this meta-level talk about clearings, about works of art and how they work to establish clearings, and how they set up a history in which there is a conflict of interpretations and new beginnings, though not a big deal beginning. One of the things we talked about among the TAs is this sort of ambiguity, which is in what I've been saying, but I think it's in Heidegger. In a certain sense, there's only one beginning to history in the West. It began, it ran down, and now it'll get a new beginning if we're good and follow Heidegger. But there's a lot of there are 5 or 6 epochs. We're always naming them: thesis, poesis, techne or production, creation, objects, and resources. So those are all sort of radical different understandings of being, all within that one history in the West, which always, by the way, the name for that one is, it always understands being as present, Heidegger says. We haven't really talked much about that. But anyway, we talked all about the meta story, that they're clear, how they work, who sets them up, what you can know about them, what you can't know about them, and so forth. Now it's time to actually do the history I just run through the history of being, namely the series of clearings that there's been in the West. But we don't have time to do that. So we're going to jump right from the thesis clearing and remarks about the poiesis clearing with Plato's productive seeing. Plato's supposed to be the poiesis person. We're going to jump right from that to the beginning of modernity. The age of the world picture is about the modern clearing. Now, one might want to say, well, that's the one we're in. And that's sort of correct to say that, because we are in modernity. But we're in sort of late modernity, or maybe post-modernity, which is really a different clearing than the one that he's going to talk about in the Age of the World picture. And we are sort of transitional. You'll see lots of things that are still very familiar in the Age of the World picture and the modern understanding of being as yours. But when you read the question concerning technology, which is next, and takes us from modernity to post-modernity, you'll see lots of things that also are very familiar and also look like the understanding of being which is yours. And that's because we're somewhere in between them. Now I've written, I don't remember why, besides that transition, that we're going from the meta level to the actual history of being, that there's something on page 156 of Basic Questions, which is also a transition. I've written Age of the World picture. I see. Okay, at the end of that section on 156, it says, he's talking about Aletheia remains of by necessity unquestioned. We've been talking about that. But the sustaining of the beginning position in the sense of techne leads to a falling away from the beginning. Beings become, to exaggerate somewhat, objects of representations conforming to them. But he doesn't really mean to exaggerate somewhat. He just means to leap ahead over a whole bunch of stages of production, creation, at least. But beings do become objects of representations conforming to them. Then Aletheia itself is interrogated. But henceforth, from the point of view of techne and Aletheia, from the point of view of techne, that is production, and Aletheia becomes the correctness of representations and procedures. Well, so you go, he's saying, look what happens, we're going to go into production and techne, that's Aristotle, and then God is the big deal producer of everything. And then we're going to go into objectivity and the correctness of representations and procedures. That should sound familiar. Remember, procedures is one of the things he spends a lot of trouble trying to explain in the Age of the World picture. So now we're really in the Age of the World picture. And the first page, it's so good, it's so clear, and it's so nicely, and condensed, but not in a way that makes it hard to understand. There's just no nonsense that I can't help reading whole chunks. So here comes the chunk on page 115, which is the first page. It has no number on it. And this is still a kind of summary of something we now, the meta story. I'm giving you a transition both ways. In Basic Questions, he points toward the Age of the World picture, and in the Age of the World picture, in this first paragraph, you could say, this is the next year after he gave this lecture course. He's now in 38. That was 37. He takes up this meta issue, and he's going to apply it. So he says, in metaphysics, reflection is accomplished concerning the essence of what is, and a decision takes place regarding the essence of truth. Metaphysics grounds in age in that through a specific interpretation of what is and a specific comprehension of truth that gives to that age the basis upon which it is essentially formed. The basis holds complete dominion over all the phenomena that distinguish the age. Well, that basis is the understanding of being, of course. And the metaphysicians, remember, are what the people he calls thinkers in the origin of the work of art. I'm going to straighten out a mistake I made here. The thinkers in the origin of the work of art are the people who name being in these various epochs. thinkers, all these named beings, but there are two kinds of thinkers, or maybe three. There are thinkers who name being and know they're doing it, or at least sense that they're doing it, who don't forget the clearing. Those would be the pre-Socratic. They don't name the clearing. They don't name being as naming being, but they sense something like that is going on. Then there are the real metaphysicians, the ones who forget the clearing altogether, like Plato, or deny it, like Aristotle went on. Those are the metaphysical things. They go from, sometimes he says that all of them have done that. I mean, it depends. Thinkers name being, for sure. That is, they name the totality of what is. Now, that's what everybody does from Parmenides up to Heidegger. If you say metaphysicians name the totality of what is, and they name it as beingness, that is, as the general property of everything that is, you might think that starts with an Anaximander. Sometimes Heidegger says that we've been metaphysical from the start. And sometimes it looks like that starts with Plato, because sometimes he implies that the pre-Socratics didn't totally forget the clearing and just think. See, when you think that you're naming the being of beings in a way that is the correspondence story, namely, that's the facts. Being is, let's say, to be an object. That's what everything is. It's an object, except for us, and we're going to objectify her, which is part of the same story. Then you're surely in metaphysics. Descartes thinks he just tells the truth about it, the correspondence truth. If you think that the pre-Socratics somehow thought that they were unconcealing it instead of corresponding it, then maybe they weren't. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be confusing it, but Heidegger is confusing and then he's not clear on this. So let me be clear. I think all metaphysicians name being, no, just messed it up. How cancel? All thinkers name being. Metaphysicians, whoever they are, name being as if it was the once and for all times and for all places, the truth in a correspondence way about all beings. Now let's see. Where else now? I think I dumped this out of my word processor. What? It isn't in here, is it? Ah, I pushed it too. Well, so let me see now. I had it. There's something also called what's the word? Provisionary or preliminary?
You said preparatory.
Preparatory. That's preparatory thinkers. Heidegger calls himself a preparatory thinker. That means that seems to be a thinker who names the clearing as the clearing and prepares the beginning of a new history. So there may be thinkers at the beginning who name being in a non-metaphysical way. It's not sure. By the time you get to Plato, there are thinkers that name being in a metaphysical way. And by the time you get to Heidegger, there are thinkers that name being in a special way whereby they understand that clearly. Yeah.
So the preparatory thinkers reveal the clearing as one clearing among
Right.
multiple possibilities, but but Heidegger doesn't provide the content of the specific understanding.
That's what I was thinking, but I didn't say it because I wasn't sure it would help. I'm sure it does help. Okay, a preparatory thinker, if that's what Heidegger says he is. I don't know where he says it, but I believe he does. A preparatory thinker tells you that there's a plurality of clearings, tells you, in effect, the history of the West, names the clearing as the clearing, but he can't give you a new clearing, for that's only a God can do that, or a work of art, or a statesman. Now, it isn't excluded that by some wonderful opportunity, Heidegger suddenly gets a new name for being, which opens up the whole new thing, and that he saw a Woodstock festival all on his own, but or whatever it would take. But he never claimed to be that, and he never claimed that he even had a chance at that. And therefore, I take back one thing I said that was misleading. I said Heidegger was running for reconfiguring, and I don't think that's right. He was running for articulator. You'll see that when he tries to explain and focus our current understanding of being in the technology essay and give it a name, because no thinker has given it a name yet. He wants to name the being of beings, our being. So he is an articulator. And he's one of these, I've already forgot the word, preparatory thinkers. But he is not a reconfiguring thinker. That is one who names a new concrete content, a new content into being, like thesis, potency. So now we're going to read about, in effect, right now, the best example we got of a real reconfiguring thinker who really does name a whole new age into being, naming modernity, and that's Descartes. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask something about last thing you said? I understand that you're saying there's no content, and that's what differentiates, but it seems like Heidegger does want us to ask questions in a particular way.
Yeah.
And why isn't that a style, like a specific way of asking questions?
Good question. I've forgotten the word style in all this. He's probably just as well say it another way. But he might give you a style of question, but he certainly hasn't got a way of giving you a style of what every entity has and people have. I mean, he'd have to have a universal style for all beings. And though he does have this sort of way of lecturing, way of questioning, it's certainly recognizable as a new style among thinkers. You can't get out of that what the style of people and things, everything is. And that would be the new content thing. Everything is a creature of God. Everything is an object for a transcendental consciousness. You can't say, well, how would you fill in the everything is from Heidegger's style? Yeah.
Seems like if you put it all, it would sound a lot like the Socratic Greek. It would be everything is disclosed by man in appearing, right?
Yes, and then it begins to sound more like a formal thing.
Exactly.
Disclosed as what?
Exactly.
Yeah, but it would be closer to the pre-Socratics, because the pre-Socratics had this sort of ambiguous insight in which they said everything shows up, and that's what they meant by disclosed. But they had a sense that everything shows up in the clear. But there was a sort of content in their thesis story, sort of. And okay, we agree about all. Let's not go back into it. Let's go onward. Okay, I want to say one thing about this first paragraph, because I constantly get beat on more and more by sort of pluralists who say, you can see how Heidegger's a kind of fascist totalizer, when he says that this understanding holds complete domination over all the phenomena. And they want to say nothing holds complete domination over all the phenomena. That's just a kind of Western metaphysical craziness that we've got over, and Heidegger should know better. Well, I think it's important that it holds, and Heidegger shouldn't say it himself, because where would be the marginal practices and the sort of reservoir of fertile muck out of which some new understanding of being is going to occur, the dirt, if this was the whole story. Well, it holds complete dominion over all the phenomena that distinguish the age. That's very important. So, insofar as if the age of the medievals were all about creativeness, then insofar as anything shows up as creatures, this is going to be dominating. But there may be some strange things around, witches who don't think that they're creatures of God, and sort of enclaves of unreformed pagans who think that things are still welling up and so forth. And Heidegger is the last to want to say that there is one meaning in all the practices. But he does want to say that anything that counts as, how will I put it, the totality of beings that, I don't know, count as anything, something according to the age. And then there's this marginal stuff that doesn't. Yeah.
But I think you need to be careful about, I mean, like the witches, right? They're going to show up within the Christian understanding, but they're going to, I mean.
Everyone sort of counts crazy, right?
But they're not, they're gonna be like doing the devil's work or
That's
something
right.
else,
And
right?
that's what the
Then there's
Christians
other things, right? Then there's other things that you can't even name. You
That's
can't
right.
even
There'll be people like the witches who are already, the Christians will think they're doing the devil's work, but of course the witches don't, and so we don't know what to think of them or how to name them. And then there will be, of course, the dirt will be even more mushy and oozy. There will just be lots of stuff going on that isn't recognizable as anything. Good, yeah.
My reading of this is that he said the whole dominion over all the phenomena that distinguish the age, and those things that are the marginal practices are not providing
That's
the
right.
things that distinguish.
That's what we want to say.
So I think he said it actually quite.
I do too.
He didn't say whole dominion over everything.
Good.
In
Well,
the-
you're just seconding me. Yes, right. Don't pin on him a view that is more totalitarian and totalizing than it is. In fact, this whole essay is against a totalizing view. He can't be saying that the metaphysicians name something that holds dominion over everything in the age, because what he thinks, he would call that total mobilization, and he thinks that sort of our age is an age of total mobilization, but that isn't that's a misunderstanding that is very definitive of us, but it's not really what's going on. What's really going on has got to be these marginal practices, the clearing, the unconcealing. But that's just an aside, practically. He does want to say that everything that counts as being, as mattering, as intelligible, that would be a good way to put it. Everything that's intelligible gets named as creatures or creatures or objects. If it isn't a creature of God, we just don't know what to make of it. And if we're in the medieval age, if we can even see it, and if it isn't an object in Cartesian state, in modernity, we don't know what to make of it. We can hardly even see it. Okay, I think that's what's going on here. So the metaphysician, back to my old story, will name the style of the culture and thereby will determine the intelligibility or what shows up as something, what it makes sense to do, what is worthy and unworthy, give you the qualitative differences. I've said that earlier. And now we come to the question, and what is the style of the modern world? What is our understanding of it? And sort of who named it, and what are the implications for us? But he doesn't jump right in and start talking about Descartes. He starts by asking about a bunch of questions about, well, what are the essential phenomena that define the modern age? On 116, and it's an interesting list. And the list is in a funny order. I don't know why it's in the order it is, but maybe it's because he's going to take up science in the rest of the essay. He does science first. One of the essential phenomena is science, and then also technology. And he says in the middle, machine technology is itself an autonomous transformation of practices, a type of transformation wherein practice first demands the employment of mathematical physical science. And that really prepares him for the essay on the question concerning technology. So he's got two stories. Science is modernity, and technology, roughly, is this next thing. But he wants to talk mostly about science, it turns out, because I think the machine technology is a further transformation for him. Okay, then he does next by the way, the machine must be second, because then he says third, an essential phenomena of the modern period. Oh, maybe I'm being unclear about something, because again, it's complicated. It sounds like machine technology is the essence of the modern. He's listing it among it. How to put this? There are really two kinds of machine technology. The kind where a subject dominates an object, where you sort of blow up a mountain and build a highway or a railroad through it, that's very much modernity. And then there's a kind of technology which is much more subtle and which makes everything flexible and orderable, like computing. He already knew about computers, and he knew that they were going to do that. the emblem of it. I mean, there's nothing there like subjects dominating objects and blowing up mountains and building railroads. Instead of sort of question of sort of heavy duty stuff. Let's see, what do we have? We have a word for this, the two kinds of technology. High tech and low tech, is that what it is, sort of? I guess there's sort of low tech is part of modernity. Cars, and locomotives, stuff. And that's why it's on this list. And high tech is what the question concerning technology is about. It's something further. So machine technology, I think I misread this. Machine technology is still modern. It's applied science. So, okay, now, then let's go on. The next one, the third one, is art moves into the purview of aesthetics. Now, that's interesting. I want to stop for a while on that one, because the art is just an example of a general phenomenon where, because there we are subjects dealing with objects, everything turns into subjective experience on the one hand, and a lot about objects on the other. But now he switches from the object side, science and technology, to the subject side. And he says, and this is so interesting, that what does it mean to say that in a way everything turns into experiences of X? But let's do it with aesthetics, because he does. Remember when he talks about the work of art, he says it's absolutely wrong-headed and irrelevant to talk about the feelings that you have when you look at a Greek temple now, which are ooh and ah and all kinds of maybe very, very exciting private experience. He says that has nothing to do with art. That only happens when the work of art is dead. When the work of art is alive, you don't have private experiences. You see everything in the light of it and act in the light of it, and it has authority over you, and you're drawn into it. Then it's not a question of contemplating an object and having private experiences. That couldn't be further. But art becomes aesthetics. Aesthetics has to do with feeling, like anesthetics, which cancel your feelings. So art becomes a matter of feelings and subjective experience. And I just want to add, and that it's not just art. Religion becomes a question of religious experience. You hear that all the time. What is religious experience? Well, it was more obvious in the 60s. It was having peak experiences. It turns out you can get them by dropping acid, or you can get them by going to church on Sunday and dancing and singing a lot. But what really matters is having this peak experience. That's what religion is about. And I think in a certain way, and it doesn't have any special authority over you. The point is to somehow develop the techniques to give you the whoppingest peak experiences, the most zing. That is what it's all about. Some of you know Houston Smith. Did anybody have Houston Smith? Houston Smith, who was once in the drug, you may not know this, in the drug dropping business, and a good friend of Timothy Leary's, and believed in these peak experiences in the 60s, later said that drugs can give you a religious experience, but they can't give you a religious life. I think he was half there when he said that. He's still around, I should really have lunch with him and see if he still holds to that, because Heidegger would say there isn't any religion, and that's still not getting it. As soon as you think of religion in terms of experience, you've lost the fact that it's something independent of you, that has authority over you, that you see the world in terms of, and that makes things intelligible. Nothing private and nothing feeling. I mean, you might have some feelings alongside that. Nobody would object, but it's not the essence of it. Okay, now, then comes the thing Hans Slug is going to talk about. That culture and becomes, there's something called culture, and it has values, and these values are what sort of direct human activity. That's another mistake. I'm not going to say anything about why that's a mistake. And I guess the number 5 is the religious experience one from the other side, the loss of the gods. On the one hand, the picture is Christianized, the world is possible. No, I haven't said much about that. I don't have much to say about the loss of the gods. I write at the end of that paragraph, when the gods have fled, what we get is historiography and psychological investigation of myth. You know who has in mind there? It's Jung and Campbell. Heidegger didn't like Jung at all. I don't know if he knew him personally, but he didn't like Jungian stuff. And of course, he would have hated Campbell, which is the ultimate sort of nihilism, in which all that's left of religion is a story about various myths and sort of what they have in common, which is, again, what Heidegger would have hated, because each religion is supposed to be a different understanding of the being, totally incompatible with the others, focused in its God. The idea that there's sort of one big flat story about all human beings captured in these myths, it's just, I can't even say how disgusting it can be. Okay, anyway, so it goes. These are the part of the modern picture. I understand. And it's all of this is about the fact that I think none of this has any authority over us anymore, because it's all either objects that we choose among, like the values, or private peak experiences which we manipulate, like the religious and aesthetic experiences. So, but the interesting story Heidegger wants to tell is to say, to find out what the essence of the modern age, you could have investigated any of these things, and you would have seen something important about modernity. But the most interesting and pronounced and revealing practice in modernity is science. So he says, let's study science and we'll understand the essence of modernity. And from now on, we have still half an hour, which is good. We go into this brilliant story about forschung, about research. And it turns out science is much too broad a category. There was empiria, which is a sort of science understood as empiricism. There was scientia, which was, what is scientia? I don't remember. Maybe it's in my notes. There is doctrina, which is sort of deducing a lot of truths from the Bible. There have been all sorts of ways of trying to understand the world. And you can lump them all under science, particularly if it's the German word science, which is Wissenschaft. They were all disciplines. But there's a special modern way of understanding the world, which he calls research. And that's what's going to tell us about modernity. And what he's got is a completely Kuhnian view of research, which is just amazing that he should have it so clear so early. Again, read The Structure of Scientific Revolution if you want to get a more complete view of this. What he's got is, now, these characteristics of research. The first one is, I think there are really three, although each one comes with several different names, particularly the first one, which is the most important. It's called projection, it's called procedure, and it's called rigor. I think those are all pretty much the same thing, or aspects of the thing. And they're the most important. What is that? Well, it's the idea that in research, and only in research, do you get this new approach to understanding everything, which is that you project a ground plan, which we don't have a very good word for this Grundriss, which they're trying to translate. The idea is it's a total interpretation of everything. Yeah.
How is it different from
It's Riss. This is a Grundriss. Is it really? Well,
and it makes sense to me.
okay, but this couldn't be a riff here. It's got to be a ground plan, because the point is that it sort of sketches out beforehand everything.
Georgian with art too.
Is it really?
He talks about a sketch or drawing.
That's right. It's the riff of a sketch or a drawing.
And it makes sense the way of laying out what's possible in the conversation.
Except
for now you're giving us strong.
Well, except it's very interesting. I mean, paper topic. But I'll try to answer it. I mean, the feature of the riff, the riff design, as it's translated in Origin of the Work of Art, is that it's how the world and earth struggle in each particular epoch, which is the gives you the style of the epoch. Here, it's all on the side of the world, so to speak. Well, you gotta know what the Grundriss is. The Grundriss example he gives is, you take a domain, say nature, and you make a projection such as nature is basically matter in motion. And then once you've said that, you have now a field of research, because you can now investigate everything. And now we're in methodology, by the way. That's the second thing. The methodology is you'll have sorry. No, that's still part of this. Once you say that it's all matter in motion, you have a procedure for how to investigate. For instance, you don't have to look at the color of it, but you do have to look at sort of where it is and how fast it's moving. He's telling you about Galileo and Newton and so forth. But and this is what I think, I don't know if we disagree, what's extremely important about the ground plan and a new idea is that you say beforehand, a priori here, what everything in nature has to be. And then you check up and see if everything is like that. That's the procedure. You go about measuring. And the rigor is that if something doesn't fit that ground plan, then you have an anomaly. And you have to deal with the anomaly by showing that it really does fit the ground. And that gives you the third thing, ongoing activity, what Kuhn calls normal science. But it all looks like world, because it isn't a struggle between earth and world. It's just, you just put this interpretation out as the answer to everything, and then you see whether you can fit everything into it.
But why is that?
Well, if you want to bring in Earth, I can see what you would have to bring it in as the anomaly. Is that what you have in mind?
And that's how we talk about Earth.
Oh, you're right.
There's still struggles.
Yes. Okay. Well, this is fascinating. This is fascinating.
Because it looks like this is the particular way in which the ground plan.
Fantastic. I think you're right. I never noticed it, and I resisted it. So, in the way the ground plan tries to cover everything, which is the world aspect, and comes up against anomalies that resist it, which is the earth aspect, we get an example of what the style of modernity is, and what the way the Grundriss, the Rift design, works. Wow! Unifying things like man. Well, that's wonderful. I mean, that's then what we would be doing to find out about modernity is saying, well, let's look at the Rift design in modernity. Why didn't he say it? We could write a better thing than he can. But that's what he's doing. And now let's look at it in some detail on 118, or for a minute anyway. He says the essence of what we today call science is research. In what does research consist? And then he says it consists in procedure and methodology. But he says for every procedure requires an open space in which it moves. It is precisely the opening up of such a sphere that is the fundamental event in research. We're now saying it's like that's the world part. This is accomplished through the projection, which in some realm of what is, in nature, for example, of a fixed ground plane. We now see that might well be the same term as a Rift design. A fixed ground plan is better for this essay. What is it? It says Grundriss Terrain sketch design. Okay. Sketch ground plan. Okay. So it can mean both. And in here, it helps to follow it, to think of it like a whole plan laid out for all of nature, right, already. For instance, just to give you an example, it'd be very relevant, Heidegger hasn't made this move yet. It looks to Heidegger as if living things is another domain that needs a different Rift design, because he was a vitalist. But it's a big success for the Galileo-Newton Rift design that people now think, given DNA, they are going to be able to give a completely mechanistic explanation of all these mysteries about how you could have an embryo that grew up to be this thing rather than that thing, and a piece of the embryo grows up to be a piece of me and not some other piece of me. And lo and behold, I mean, that's part of the project of this mechanical modern view. And probably, I mean, maybe it's not really going to work. I mean, there's a famous scientist here who thinks that it's going to run up against anomalies to try to make a treat like mechanistically, but that's not the point. The ground plan claims that you can do it. Then there's going to be anomalies. can't think of the name of the retired guy in the National Academy, Levy, something, you know, who has the things for life is holistic and who has anomalies for the DNA people to worry about. But then, of course, that's fine. From their point of view, great, new anomalies. We have to show that they're really mechanisms too. It just looks whole, like the pop. It looks, he thinks that life is somehow, as people used to, sort of determined by the whole organism, determines what's going to happen for all the parts. Whereas the rift design of modernity, which is mechanistic and atomistic, thinks that it has to be somehow explained in terms of the elements, finally the DNA code. So, in any case, you get this ground plan and you put it over all natural events, and life too, it turns out. The projection sketches out in advance the manner in which the knowing procedure must bind itself and adhere to the sphere opened up. This binding of adherence is the rigor of research. Now let's say something about the rigor. That's really the most interesting part, and it goes by really fast. But he does know, and it's Kuhn too, that the rigor is what's really new in the research business. He doesn't stop to give you much of a counter class. I mean, it's clear that if you look at it this way, you'll see that you can produce anomalies. If you have an idea of how everything has to be, then if things aren't that way, you get anomalies. Another way to put it is an anomaly means something that doesn't fall under a law. And he thinks that, for instance, now I give you a counterexample. Aristotle described how things behave as a rule. If you think that that's on 121. If you think that what your job of science is describe things as a rule, it's very hard. This is the very middle of 121. That means Aristotle wanted to make generalizations. But if all you've got is how things are as a rule, you don't have anomalies. Because sometimes, swans are white as a rule. But if you have, let me just think, a law, he thinks, then you can have experiments and falsification. He says a little further down, experiment begins with the laying down of a law as basis. But it's about 2/3 of the way down. If you've got a law, you've got anomalies. And law is what Galileo introduced into this. It's not the same as a generalization from as a rule. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that rule is ambiguous.
Right. But the way he's understanding it, it's clearly going to be making how things behave as a rule would be to make generalizations about them.
Well, that means they're by and large.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you found that more and more swans were black until you could hardly find any white ones, it wouldn't be so much an anomaly. You just have to, your generalization wouldn't work. To have an anomaly, you got to have a law, and the law covers every case. And as soon as you've got one case that doesn't come under the law, that overthrows the law unless you can fix it. And that is an anomaly, and then the normal science, or what does he call it, ongoing activity, tries to fix it. So Galileo discovers that feathers and cannonballs, according to his theory, ought to fall at the same speed, but they don't really fall at the same speed. And then it looks like an exception, but it isn't. Then you think about friction and the atmosphere, and you discover, well, they really do, but they're countervailing forces. But you can't just say, and here's the important thing, well, that's an exception. Let me give it to you. In Aristotle, you could say, well, that's a monster. We go out and we categorize all the kinds of things there are, and we say that every animal has one head, for instance. Then you come across an animal that has two heads. Well, as a rule, animals have one head, and then there are monsters. And in Christianity, you have a general principles about how things behave, and how God generally orders the universe. And then every once in a while, there's a wild exception. Says in the Bible, like Joshua stopped the sun for a long time. Well, that's a miracle, and that's all right. I mean, we never said that the sun always took 24 hours to go around. So you can't have research and anomalies and procedure and the ongoing activity until you have a total ground fault. The Greeks couldn't have it. The medievals couldn't. That is, Scientia Doctrina can't have it. Scientia is probably sort of Plato. Let's try Plato. Plato had rigorous total theories, but Plato thought that they didn't fit this world very well. We were in a kind of messy condition, the receptacle, where these pure, rigorous theories were sort of stamped on this receptacle by the demiurge, but of course he didn't take. So and so you can't expect this world to follow those. So there again, no anomalies. Just what do you expect from a messy spatial world? And the same thing in Aristotle. There's matter. Matter never takes on the form of anything very completely. So what do you expect? Every once in a while you get a monster. So that, thanks to Galileo, you get a whole new story. It's that you project a totally clear picture and you demand that everything fit that picture. That's rigor. And then you go out and you find anomalies and you have to fix them. That's ongoing activity. The method, by the way, I skipped it. I think, let me just give it to you in three parts. I think there is this first part, which is ground plan, procedure, and rigor. And then there is the method stuff. And the method is formulate universal laws, find anomalies, and solve the puzzles that gives you. And then there's ongoing activity. I guess, well, sorry, let's put that down. Solve the puzzles. That belongs down here. He's not clear. I'm trying to impose some kind of clear order. So the method is formulate universal laws and find the anomalies. And the third thing is ongoing activity, that is, solve the puzzles that show up. Or you have to have a revolution. You can't just say, well, you can wait a long time. There were lots of anomalies in Newton that the moon wasn't in the right place, the perihelion of Mercury wasn't in the right place, and so forth. Things that, some of them they got fixed after hundreds of years. I think the moon story was the way the tides reacted back on the moon. They hadn't thought about that. And of course, the story about the perihelion of Mercury, whatever that is, that never got fixed. That only relativity could explain. And finally, the Newtonian theory was overthrown by the fact that there were anomalies that they couldn't beat into shape. Then they had to give up the whole thing. And that's all right. Well, one more thing. Heidegger was very Kuhnian in that he says at the beginning of the being in time that science really progresses when there are revolutions, because then you discover that your whole ground plane. He doesn't say that, but that's what it means. And you get a new ground plane, get a whole new understanding of reality. That's really exciting and important. And then science really progresses. So Einstein comes in and overthrows Newton. That's not bad news. At the time that Heidegger was writing this, people were busy trying to fix it, so they never had another revolution. People like, there was operationalism of, what's the guy's name? Percy Bridgman and so forth. People busily trying to figure out how you could formulate scientific theories so rigorous that you never have to dunk them again, the way we had to dunk Newton. And then there was a few very smart people, I don't know any besides Heidegger, who understood that the point wasn't to fix science so you didn't have to dump a whole ground plan. The point was to make the ground plan so clear and so rigorous that it would produce anomalies that would finally overthrow it. And that's what this is about. Yeah.
This is, Heidegger's going to set the opinion point that there's always sort of choices, increasing sense of anomalies, but it's not like you're forced into a revolution.
Right. He doesn't talk about it, but I'm sure he'd be happy with this idea. That you can, and I just sort of implying it, you can put up with an anomaly a long time, hoping that you'll get it figured out eventually. But when there are too many of them, and somebody comes along with a theory in which those anomalies now fit into the theory, then he'll eventually, presumably, win out, but not immediately. All of this is much more of the Kuhnian. Heidegger hasn't got a story about it.
So the point about counterexamples is that they can't stand as counterexamples. They can't, but you have to take that as that they will be solved.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. You can't just say they're monsters, they're miracles. What do you expect from the earth, from the universe? It's made out of messy stuff. You can't say that. And that means that some whole new way of thinking has come in. Namely, and this is now really where it gets exciting, that if we impose this total order on things, and then we see how it turns out. But what Heidegger's interested in is not so much the story about science, but the idea that our job is to impose a total order, and that we can do that, and that everything then gets its intelligibility by how it fits into the total order that we impose. So now we've gotten to the big issue here. The real discovery, according to Heidegger, is objectification. This is on 127. Let's start at the bottom of 126. We are reflecting, well, let's see, there's something here. Okay. We are reflecting on the essence of modern science in order that we may apprehend it in its metaphysical ground. What understanding of what is and what concept of truth provide the basis for the fact that science is being transformed into research. Now, remember that he thinks that science, back to the age of the world picture, if I could flip to it, that when he's talking about the various ways truth can set itself to work, he says, he gives this whole list, which I'm constantly running through. Oh, great. It's just 51. 53? Ah, okay. Notice that at the end of that list, where he says there are thinkers and martyrs and gods and so forth, he says that, what? No. 62? Yes, 62. Okay, at the top there. He says, by contrast, science is not an original happening of truth, but always the cultivation of a domain of truth already open, specifically by apprehending and confirming what so and so and so and so. And now, what we're doing is we're passing from the question about what is science to what is the philosophical, metaphysical, new understanding of being that made science possible, that made it possible for Galileo and Newton to think in terms of ground planes. Well, that was already moving in the practices in Galileo. What metaphysician finally understood what all reality had to be so that you could have research, is how Heidegger's asking the question. What metaphysics is science living at? And the answer is, it's a new metaphysics in which to be is to be an object. This is on 127. No, but I'll start at the bottom of 126. Knowing as research calls whatever is to account with regard to the way in which and to the extent in which it lets itself be put at the disposal of representation. We'll hear more about that in a minute. Research has disposal over anything that is when it can either calculate it and so forth. Nature is calculated in advance, set in place. Nature and history become objects of representing that explain. I mean, I could sort of try to show how even history gets treated as research gets its universal principles for history, or there are anomalies, but it's not worth going into, so let's just stick to nature. Such representing counts on nature and takes account of history. Only that which becomes object in this way is considered to be in being. We first arrive at science as research when the being or whatever is sought in such objectness. And now, how do you do that? What is objectivity and representation? Yeah.
Just go back for a minute.
Yeah.
Concerned that you block a ground plan with reimposed ground plan.
Yes.
Sounds a bit like an
But he does say it. I mean, I'll show you where. I mean, it's all right. Nietzsche is going to draw, you're preparing for Heidegger's wonderful move in his Nietzsche lectures that Nietzsche is the best Cartesian. And it always seems like such a shock. What? Yeah, Nietzsche can avow what Descartes is really doing. But let me find you the phrase that is most perfect for this, and it's going to be what I'm going to be explaining right now anyway. But I'm not sure I can find it. It's about forcing things into our normative realm, is what I'm looking for. Well, I think I'll probably come across it. So, but let me get at it step by step. So what does objectifying mean and representing mean? One of the things, how many have had 25B? Well, you've got to sort of unlearn what you learned about Descartes in 25B. Heidegger would never pass 25B. As far as an account of, if this is supposed to be an account of what Descartes means by representation. But of course it's not. In Heidegger it's supposed to be what he calls the unthought. It's what's really sort of implied in Descartes' notion of representation. Because when Descartes uses representation, which you presumably learned in 25B, it's a kind of mental copy of what's out there. He's got this question of God has to assure that our representations in our minds correspond to what's out there. But that's just because Descartes hadn't fully grasped yet what he was up to, Heidegger would say. And it was prevented in part by the unfortunateness of having to speak Latin and French instead of German, because representation sounds like some kind of representation in the mind of what's present out there. But German says for representation, Vorstellung. Hyphen is in German, Heidegger's thinking about it. Vorstellung is to place something before yourself. So what Descartes really meant when he said that everything was representation was that it, and he did say it was an object, which really is throwing opposite. And an object in German is a Gegenstand, that is something that stands over against me. But what he likes about representation is that he reads that as not just something standing over against, but he reads it like object, something throwing against me. And it's something that I throw over against me. Now you can see how he's working it around to be like the ground plane. I mean, the representation is the interpretation that I, or man, or us, we Westerners, whoever we are, we Cartesians, I don't know who the we is, but we put onto the universe. That is, we throw out a projection, and then we fit everything into it. I've got to find the crucial quote. Somewhere it says, we put everything into our normative realm. Probably have it marked in a different copy of this. I don't know whether I'm going to find it. Maybe it's in the footnotes. That would be unfortunate. It's not. Well, it's a pretty important quote. Well, let me look at my notes. You found it? Maybe I should just stick to we get the picture. Let's go back to 128. We'll get there eventually. So how is this objectifying happening? Well, we get the picture. Man becomes on 128, the second paragraph, the relational center of that which is. And then I've got to get it. So the world is conceived and grasped as picture. Got it, just in time. What? On 131, the bottom paragraph. The distinction from Greek apprehending, in distinction from Greek apprehending, modern representing, whose meaning the word representio first brings to its earliest expression, intends something quite different. Here to represent, Vorstellung, means to bring what is present at hand before oneself as something standing over against, to relate it to oneself, to the one representing it, and to force it back into this relationship to oneself as the normative realm. That is, we impose our standards on it. Now, the clearest way to think about this, and I'm so glad you've had 25 feet, when Descartes was halfway there, Descartes said that all of reality is made up of little bits so that we can analyze. And that was our job in the rules for understanding. You did get that in 25B, I imagine, that it was our job to analyze things into their elements and then reconstitute them out of their elements, and that's what it was to understand something. And then it turns out that, and why should nature be atomistic and made out of elements so we can analyze it? Well, God is good, and given that's the way our mind works, that's how God made the universe. Well, now just factor out God. That's all Kant did, and said, well, no, our world is, we assume that it doesn't count as real unless it's made up of bits and we can analyze it. We provide the standard, and we just force everything into our normative realm, that is what we count as intelligible. And we say if it isn't analyzable into bits, then it must be an illusion or hallucination or an anomaly or something. And we just say that everything has to live up to our standards of intelligibility. Of course, we don't have fixed standards of intelligibility. Aristotle had different ones. But in the ones that it happens that Descartes had the standards of intelligibility, that everything should be analyzed into elements and fall under laws. And now we just say that's what we're going to count as real. And we've gone from Descartes to Kant, who does the unthought of Descartes, because Kant understands. Descartes really talks about representation, and it sounds like some kind of mental topic. This is Descartes, but then Kant sort of translates representation into fortune and says it's the way we make things intelligible. We subjects turn everything into objects. That's what it is to be. To be a subject is to be able to project our intelligibility, our categories on everything. And to be is to be something that conforms to our standards of intelligibility. And now two things. That's what makes science possible. We ask what philosophical move makes science possible. And now I have to say one more thing quickly, and that defines modernity in the sense that it tells us the essence of modernity is two things, I think, that for Heidegger, and we'll come back to this. It's totalizing. It has this total ground plan. That's something new. And it brings the totalizing back to a subject. A subject is the ground of all intelligibility. Takes the place of God. It needn't be a human being. He says sometimes you can think of the nation as the ground of intelligibility, or the folk. That is, he's now going anti-Nazi, but that's another form of subjectivity. Or you could think of the working class as the subject of history. But what's new is there has always got to be a subject, and that subject is going to be the source of the intelligibility of everything. And everything is going to count as real only insofar as it meets that subject standards of intelligibility. That's the essence of modernity. That's all the further I had to get before we.
I don't know that.
Don't forget,